Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Long-Distance Worklife, the podcast dedicated to remote, hybrid, working, thriving, surviving, wherever you happen to be, trying to get your work done. My name is Wayne Turmel. I am super excited to be here today. This is a Sans Marissa episode, which means we have a very learned, exciting, cool guest that I'm excited for you to see, and we're going to bring him in right now. Nathan Kracklauer, who is in Germany somewhere. Welcome to the Long Distance Worklife.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. It's a pleasure being here.
So, who are you and why do we care?
Well, I am the chief research officer of a company called Abilitie, and Abilitie does management and leadership training through a methodology called experiential learning, and specifically through business simulations. And we have a solution that is what we call a mini MBA. We call it the 12-week MBA, about which I have just written a book along with our CEO. And it's an online learning experience, which I think is what many of your listeners will be interested in, to see, what are the approaches you can take to learning, how to learn about management-related topics online, but also maybe what management-related topics are different when you're working online.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's start with the idea of the kind of do-it-yourself, structured, finding stuff where you can way of educating yourself. A lot of our listeners know I don't have a formal college degree, certainly not an MBA, and yet here I am, right? So I am passionate about self-development and learning and taking it on yourself. How does the kind of traditional MBA experience butt up against remote and hybrid work in the way that we're working now in whatever part of the 21st century this is?
Yeah, I think that's one of the core questions. I think for many years, just having the traditional MBA to work with as an option has limited very many people from gaining the kinds of management not experience, but the access to the skills, the knowledge, and the insights, and the mindsets. Even though they would, like you said, for yourself, have ample opportunities to have to use them in the real world that they were facing, right? And the challenge, I guess, of the traditional MBA is it makes you take off, 1 to 2 years out of the workforce, and that is a huge cost, both personal, because that's 2 years out of your life, and it's a financial as well, but it's also the opportunity of cost of not continuing to develop your personal network in an industry and in a company. You're not developing your knowledge of that industry and your skills specific to that industry and that company. And so for many people, it hasn't really been an option or an attractive option. And yet we all know that when you make that transition from being an individual contributor to being a manager, you need some kind of support. It's an entirely different universe on the other side of that threshold.
So what are the things specifically, call them topics or subject matters, just because we got to call them something. Where are the areas of learning that, particularly when it comes to remote work, people are most in need of?
Yeah, so in our program, we focus on 2 areas, and with respect to remote learning and the remote working and the challenges thereof, it's really the second topic that is, I think, the one that stands in our focus, which is how we work with people. And in truth, few of our formal learning opportunities, certainly throughout school and throughout college and even throughout the MBA, they don't focus enough on that. And yet, what we need to know about how to work alongside others and through others as a manager is all the more urgent in that remote setting. And I think the first principle, again, in any kind of relationship, in any kind of working relationship, is the principle of working in a trusting relationship, finding trust. But it's all the more important online, working remotely, as I have experienced myself, because there are so few opportunities to do the kinds of care and feeding of relationships that sort of are natural and built into how we have been sort of built to work together over millennia and over our entire evolutionary history. So we're kind of separated from each other when we work remotely. And a lot of the ways that we build trust are not, just simply not there. So we have to find ways to replicate them online.
So one of the things that I have certainly dealt with in my own career, and the people who take advantage of your program, or those just building their own, right? As so many of us have done, is at least if you go to Wharton or even University of Phoenix or something where there is a name that says, yes, you have completed this, if you're going to develop yourself, how do you do that in a way that is credible to the people who are going to care, right? People in your organization who promote you, who want to know that you've actually studied this stuff. You can't just say, oh, yeah, I read all these books and took all these online courses. How do you actually build a credible resume with the outside world when you're doing it piecemeal, bit by bit, on your own?
Yeah, that is truly the challenge. And I think from an employer perspective, it's quite interesting. Our CEO and I were talking about this just the other day about his experience that he had recently speaking to somebody on the employer side who also questioned whether the amount of time and money you spent on an MBA, for those who have done that, actually bodes well for your decision-making prowess and your financial investment-making prowess in the real world. So that could actually go in the opposite direction. But I think what employers do value is the fact that you are making those efforts, because not everybody does. So if you can say, look, I actually went to this course and it was concluded. Now we have to, of course, providers like ourselves have to provide something that says, yes, it was completed according to the completion criteria we have, so that you can legitimately post that on your LinkedIn resume, for your LinkedIn profile, or on your resume. But the signal that you are doing that you are spending money, but more importantly, your time to develop yourself, indicates something to employers. And that may actually be as appreciated if it's at smaller and incremental scales and in specific targeted areas than if it's this general traditional 2-year MBA that's highly expensive and the content might not be as focused on the specific tasks that you are that you're currently doing, or that you're trying to apply for in your next job and the next step up.
Which I think for those listening kind of raises an important point. And while I'm not, I don't encourage busy work and kind of covering your butt with tons of paperwork, you need evidence of having done these things, even if it's just a certificate from the provider or something to say that you have completed this program or gotten this grade on the program, or however it works. You got to have that evidence.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ways that, I mean, we're experimenting with this, as I think many programs are, something we introduced just in the last cohort that we had for our program, was to have the option to have closing interviews, so to speak, with some of our facilitators and so our faculty. And what that allowed the participants to do was to share. I mean, it wasn't like an oral examination, but they had some questions that they could prepare and then have a conversation really with the faculty member that went back and forth. So how does this apply to you in this concept that you talked about? How does this apply to your particular position? And, how could it apply in your next position, and having more of a conversation around some of the core topics. But what that also allowed for is the participant to feel quite confident that they had truly understood the concepts. So it had that character of an examination without feeling like it, to provide validation of the concepts. And what it then allowed us to do is to say, you know what, as part of that, if you apply to your next job, we'll also write a recommendation for you on that basis. So there are ways, I think, that these online programs like ours are experimenting with to provide exactly that sort of evidence in ways that are also even relevant, maybe more relevant than just having a stamp of approval on a resume or a badge on a LinkedIn charter.
Yeah, you said something earlier that I want to get back to, which is the notion of learning in cohorts. There's kind of this notion that, especially if you are a remote worker and you're out in the provinces somewhere, wherever you happen to be,
Okay.
that you're kind of on your own to do this. Certainly, a lot of what I did back in the day was me and a book and a course and an online thing. But talk to me about learning in cohorts and what that means.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's new terminology that has come along, but what it gets to is that learning is inherently also a social activity. And when you think about it, um, what we get out of our peers is not just that we can learn from each other, although that's a big part of it, right? We'll have complementary experiences. But if we could put together with a group of other peers and have avenues for interacting with each other, we will teach each other things, but we'll also be using each other as benchmarks. Really, we'll say, I'm finding this very hard. If we do that on our own, right? If we're all in our lonesome reading a book, we don't know, is the problem with me, or is this book maybe not written well, or is this concept not one that's even relevant to me? We just don't know these things. If you go into a group of peers and you find, I'm having a hard time with this, but then I discover everybody else is too, that actually is a very relieving experience that can help us be motivated to actually dive a little bit deeper and put in the extra effort. Or conversely, we find that everybody else already understands it, then that might raise some anxiety, but that also means it's time for us to up our game because everybody else gets this concept. I better get it too. So there are many different ways that we reinforce each other's motivation and learning when we work together in groups or cohorts, as is the fashionable word now.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said for learning with other people. And, we spend a lot of time when we work remotely and we work in our own heads going, maybe it's just me. And
Right.
this,
Yes,
this notion
exactly.
that
Yeah.
it's probably not.
Yeah.
Right. I
And
mean, where it
yeah.
is you, clearly you need to step up your game, but where you realize, oh, it's not just me. Or a lot of times I'll find that a colleague or somebody else has a way of explaining it that maybe is clearer than what the instructor is telling me.
Yeah,
Right. And
exactly.
it's a way
Yeah,
of picking it up that way. So,
exactly.
what's the balance of alone work? And I know we're talking about your program in particular, and there are other companies out there, no big shock. There are other companies doing kind of the same thing. And certainly you can self organize a lot of stuff. But, just in your uh, company's experience, what's the balance of head down alone work versus synchronous with other people versus asynchronous with other people?
Yeah, trying to run the numbers in my head now, but I think it's going to be on the scale of 2/3, 3/4 actually in synchronous activities for us. And I think that's really important, especially when it's online. Now, the reason that we can do that is that our particular methodology, I mean, one way to do this, right, would be, hey, you come to a synchronous event where there's an instructor and maybe they're able to get the discussion going on a Zoom call with breakouts. And there's some of that too. But then that the classic way of doing this is then you go and you work on something on your own, an exercise, a problem set, or whatever it is. You maybe write a little paper and deliver it. That's sort of the classic way of doing things, where a lot of the application is what you do on your own, and then the information gathering is what you do in the classroom. What we do is we have these business simulations that are platforms for actually applying the concepts directly, and we're in one synchronous experience along with our colleagues and with a faculty member, going through cycles of experiencing the actual content by making decisions, running a virtual business along with our colleagues, and then going back and cycling back into a discussion with the instructor about, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean in the real world? Here are some new tips and ideas, new concepts, maybe on business acumen, maybe on how to build trust, maybe on how to work together in teams. And now with those new inputs, let's go back into the next cycle and start applying them. So in that way, what we have is a experience that is fundamentally built on the synchronous, and where the asynchronous components and the self-study components are somewhat ancillary to that.
One of the things that I find fascinating is, and the more I do this podcast, the more I realize, I'm a Canadian living in the States, talking to people wherever. And and that has just boggled my brain for years, right? That the world is that small. You are living in Germany right now. How does the rest of the world look at these kind of incremental, uh, less formal ways of learning? Do German companies offer more or less credibility to those, or they still kind of hidebound to the traditional university approach? What's the rest of the world doing about this?
It's really, of course, quite complicated because, first of all, I don't know most of the rest of the world. I do know Europe fairly well, and there's divides north, south, east, west, and all that that make that answer quite complex to answer. Just for example, I think you find that in traditionally the Latin-based
Mm-hmm.
culture, so Southern Europe, the role of the teacher, the instructor, is quite different. The expectation coming from learners is that that person be more of an authority figure. Whereas in Northern Europe, you would now have no, we're all peers here, including the faculty member, and so that drives a whole different. I mean, that's part of this, but that's just one of the major phenomena that overlays the cultural differences that alone makes up for significant differences, I would say, between any given area in Europe and the US. And I know it's quite, there are many similar dynamics in play also all around the world. I've worked quite a bit in Asia also. I think in terms of the acceptance and credibility of these things, I do think the US is moving somewhat more quickly on that. The idea of do-it-yourself and less formal training and alternatives to traditional methods. I think there's more of a willingness to pioneer that in the US. And I don't mean pioneer it from the state of point of view of the provider, but pioneer it as an actual user thereof, as somebody willing to try these things out. By and large, I think the acceptance is somewhat higher in the US. But at the same time, I want to qualify with that with saying that many of the areas around the world that have not had access to, let's say, the traditional forms of education are also now quite willing to pioneer that and are hungry for it. So I have personally not had many opportunities to travel to Africa, for instance, but I know that we have actually many participants in our open enrollment programs coming from Africa through partnerships in that broad region, very large region, continent. And that actually are quite interested in using these alternatives because they are more accessible in time, accessible in terms of the financial resources required, and so on.
Wow. I've got about 10 more questions that I want to ask and not nearly enough time. Nathan Kracklauer from Abilitie. If you are interested in learning more about their programs, if you're interested in learning more about Nathan, we will have all of those links and other good stuff on our website, longdistanceworklife.com, along with a transcript of this conversation, so that if you missed some of the good stuff that we talked about or didn't get the notes right, they are there for you. Nathan, thank you so much for being with us, man. I really appreciate your time today. It's been a good conversation.
Thank you, Wayne. It has been. And I look forward to speaking with you again.
All righty. So we are wrapping it up. As I say, you can always find transcripts, links, information on this or any of our conversations at longdistanceworklife.com. I would also urge you, if you are interested in learning more about leading remote hybrid teams, Nathan mentioned public programs. Certainly, Abilitie has public programs that anyone in the world can register for, as do we. The Long Distance Leadership Series is an important part of what we do. You can visit kevinikenberry.com, LDLS, which stands for Long Distance Leadership Series. And as always, you can reach out to myself or Marissa. Questions, comments, vicious personal attacks, anything that you would like to share with us, we are at your service. You can email us or connect through LinkedIn or our LinkedIn page for this show, for the Long Distance Work Life. that's it. Thank you so much. You all know how podcasts work. Please like and subscribe. We hope that if this is your first time with us, you see it. Check out the other episodes. And if you are a longtime listener, thank you, and be part of the community. Be part of the conversation. We want to bring you stuff that you want to know about. So that's it. I am, pretty much done with you for the day. Go and do. My name is Wayne Turmel. Don't let the weasels get you down.